Welcome, everyone, to our celebration of the Ayn Rand Institute's 2022 Atlas Shrugged Essay Contest winners. Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand was published way back in 1957. 66 years later, it still sells thousands of copies every year and continues to make the headlines. Obviously, it is a book of enduring significance. And this is, of course, part of the reason, a big part of the reason why the Ayn Rand Institute sponsors its annual contest on the novel. The Institute has sponsored essay contests on other novels by Ayn Rand ever since its foundation in the 1980s. And we've sponsored the Atlas Shrugged contest since 1999. It's been our tradition for as long as we've had the internet to announce our winners online, but just in the last few years, we have started this new tradition of hosting these online ceremonies, not only to announce the winners, but also to share some of their great work by showing you excerpts from their essays. This is really one of our favorite things to do. So, hello, my name is Ben Bayer. I am a fellow and instructor at the Ayn Rand Institute. What we're going to do today is unveil the winners, third place, second place, and first place gradually throughout the webinar today. We'll start by first saying a few things about the contest and what it's about and how we judge it. We'll then start to move through sharing some excerpts from different prompts. And as we do that, we'll gradually unveil the winners. And as I mentioned, there's third place, second place, and first place winners. So just want to share you what kind of prize money we're talking about today. The third place winners, there's 5 of them, will each receive $500. There are 3 second place winners. They will get $2,500 each. And our first place winner, our very, very meritorious first place winner, will get $10,000. Now, in case you're watching today, because maybe you know somebody who's a finalist or you've heard about the contest and you want to learn more about it, I just want to warn you about one thing, and that is that by showing excerpts from these essays, and we're occasionally going to be talking about things that happened in the course of the novel. So there's going to be plot spoilers. So this is a warning that if you haven't read Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged before, and you really want to get the amazing experience of reading it for the first time, you may want to go do that and watch this recording later, or you risk learning some things about the plot that really are delightful to learn the first time when you read it. Okay, so having said all of that, I would like to bring on one of my colleagues who's going to be co-hosting with me today, and that is Sam Weaver, who's a junior fellow here at the Ayn Rand Institute. So part of the reason we wanted to bring Sam on is not just that he has an expertise in literature, but also because he himself participated in this contest. Sam, you did this back in 2019, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't know if that was the first time. In fact, I'm pretty sure this was not the first time you read it. You didn't read it just for the contest, but tell us both about a little bit about your experience reading the book for the first time, and then having read it, what was the process of writing the essay like, and what did you learn from it?
Sure. Yeah, so I first read Atlas Shrugged back when I was in high school. I'd read Ayn Rand's Anthem, another one of her novels. Really enjoyed it, was kind of captivated by the story of that novel and wanted to read more by the same author, and heard Atlas Shrugged was her top work, so I got into that one, and it really changed a whole lot for me. It brought up just so many important questions, but also answers to those kind of questions that I never really heard before. And of course, it was a very interesting, exciting story as well. And so it really opened my eyes to a lot of important issues and got me thinking a lot more, and actually got me to start studying Ayn Rand's philosophy more seriously, and got me, really, really interested in learning more about what she had to say, which, of course, it eventually ended in me working for the Ayn Rand Institute. I wrote the essay for the contest, in 2019. This was when I was in my first year of graduate school. So this was actually only the second time I read the novel, was when I read it for writing the contest essay. So I read it for the first time in high school, learned a whole lot about Ayn Rand's ideas, and then came back to the novel and really found it exciting to go back to it again after all those years. And also, with kind of this, knowing that I was going to be writing this essay, having that in mind, going into the novel with a much more perceptive eye, looking for things that were of importance, things I would want to write about. And I think the process of thinking about the novel that way helped me get so much more enjoyment and learning out of it.
Do you remember what the topic of your winning essay was?
Yeah, the topic was about what is the most important conflict in Atlas Shrugged. And I wrote about the point that really the most important conflicts are between the heroic characters, especially between the main hero of the book, John Galt, and the character we follow most of all, Dagny Taggart, and how that Ayn Rand was conveying something really deep by having that be the main conflict instead of the good guys versus the bad guys.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people miss, maybe at least the first time they read the story. There's a lot of things people miss the first time they read it. It's a long book, and that's actually part of the reason why we have these essay contests, because we want people who might otherwise have only read the story to enjoy the plot to have the chance to look more carefully at some of the ideas that go into animating the plot. And it sounds like that's part of what doing the essay did for you, Sam. It's not the only way to find out more about the ideas behind Ayn Rand's novels. Another one is the reading groups that we are now hosting, and you are involved in those as well, Sam. So could you tell us a little about, for students who might want to get involved, what these reading groups are all about?
Yeah. So depending on how much you know about Ayn Rand, you may or may not know that Ayn Rand wrote a lot of nonfiction essays expressing her philosophy and applying it to real world issues. And there are a number of books that collect her nonfiction essays. And we wanted to create an opportunity for people to read these essays and discuss them with a group of other kind of young people, students who are interested in Ayn Rand and her ideas, and kind of be able to get to know other people who are also interested in these ideas, while also reading these essays and starting to learn more and thinking more deeply about her philosophy. So yeah, if you read Atlas Shrugged, entered the contest, and you really enjoyed it and were interested by some of the ideas in the novel, I think you'd really enjoy our reading groups. And yeah, as Ben mentioned, the groups are led by a member of the junior faculty at ARI, and I lead some of them, and there are other group leaders as well. And so we'll just facilitate the discussion and help you get a great experience reading these essays and thinking through the ideas that Ayn Rand's talking about in them.
Great, thanks, Sam. So let me say a few other things about this year's contest. This year we had hundreds of people send us their essays from all over the world, dozens of different countries. And someone already asked on Zoom, are there only first, second, and third place awards? No, there's also semifinalists and finalists, and there will be 50 semifinalists, each of whom will get $50, and 25 finalists who will get $100. We're, I believe, at the end of the webinar today, also going to announce at least the names of the 25 finalists. I don't think we'll be able to read them all, but you'll be able to see your name on screen. And we will be posting a full list of all winners of whatever rank, along with the text of the winning essay that we'll talk about today on our website at aynrand.org/contests. So I think as soon as the episode is over today, we will have the full list of winners published there, and you can see, if you don't already know, who if your name is on there, and maybe someone you know has their name on there as well. This whole enterprise, of course, which gives out a decent amount of prize money, is made possible entirely by private donations to the Ayn Rand Institute. And so one thing I want to just mention today is if you're a donor and you're watching, this is your money in action. And thank you so much for making all this possible. I think this is one of the most direct ways that we can educate more and more young people about Ayn Rand's novels and about her ideas. I should mention it was some donors' money a long time ago, back in the mid-1990s, that got me to read The Fountainhead for the first time when I thought about doing the essay contest. So that's part of the reason I like doing these episodes so much. Okay, so Sam, why don't we start by sharing with our audience who the finalists are? These are the 9 people we're going to be sorting into third, second, and first place.
Yes. So these are our top 9 placers in the contest. And so here they are. Their names are Annemiek Gritter, Blake Walker, Claire Huchthausen, Dominique Lazaro, Francis Elcaron, Heather Jost, Jacob Fisher, Lindsay Funk, and Vivian Turnbull. So those are our top 9. But how did they place? Who won the first place? Who won second place prizes? And who won the third place prizes? That's what we're going to get into as our program continues.
And those of you who are good at the process of elimination will be able to figure this out, I think. As soon as we unveil some, you'll be able to see who's left. But that's what the drama is all about. I do want to say, before we get to our first chunk of excerpts from one of the prompts that we want to talk about, I want to say just a quick word about how we judged these essays. These essays are all graded blindly, so no one knows who the entrant is when we're looking at them. But what our graders are looking for, generally speaking, are these things. One, we obviously want someone who stays on topic. We give you a prompt, a very specific question, and we're looking to see that you have done your best to answer that question. All parts of the question, not just the ones that are the most interesting to you. We're looking for an essay that is logically organized, that's exceptionally clear, that does a good job interrelating the ideas of the novel with the concrete events and characters of the novel. This is a particularly difficult thing to do. And then one which displays an understanding of both. We're not looking we're not looking at all for someone who necessarily agrees with Ayn Rand's ideas, but we are looking for someone who knows what they are and who understands what they mean and can explain those to an audience whether they agree with them or not. And sometimes we ask questions about whether or not the student agrees or disagrees. We get a variety of different answers, but we're primarily looking for someone who's really tried to grapple with these novels and try to understand what the author is saying with her story. So having said that, let's we have 3 essay prompts this year, 3 different question topics that we ask people about, and we'd like to talk about each of them. We'd like to share some responses or excerpts of responses to each of these prompts. And let's start with the first prompt. Sam, what was the first prompt?
Yeah. So the first prompt, which was about shortages, reads, "In the world of Atlas Shrugged, material goods that many of the characters take for granted become increasingly difficult to obtain as the plot progresses. Identify several examples of such goods and explain how the novel accounts for their disappearance. Describe the economic and moral philosophical forces at work in their disappearance. Are there significant parallels with the shortages our world has witnessed in the last few years? Explain any similarities and differences using contemporary examples."
Yes, this was a question that I'm pretty sure was written during COVID, and that's what inspired the question. And as I expected, we did get a number of people mentioning these kinds of parallels in their answers. But first, let me share one of our answers, an excerpt from one of our answers. This is one that comes from Eamon Newton, who is a junior at University of Notre Dame in Indiana. And this is an answer that more or less does a really good job summarizing some of the kinds of shortages that are occurring in the novel, and something about what causes them, something about the ideas that the author thinks are at work in bringing these about. So Eamon writes, "Both the oil and copper shortages came about due to the implementation of the phrase, from each according to his ability. Ellis Wyatt was told to produce despite targeted taxes and increased railroad fees. D'Anconia was being asked to work for a nationalized copper business that had been taken from him. In a Marxist system, ability becomes a mortgage on you that you can never pay off, he quotes, and hence those with ability either act as though they do not possess it or leave altogether. I think that's an accurate summary of both the shortages and also the cause, though in Eamon's essay, he goes to a greater length to explain why it is that idea and how it is that idea brings about these shortages. And we can't summarize that all here, but I think that was a good capsulized essence of it. Sam, you have another one from prompt 1 we should look at?
Yeah, I have an excerpt from Melissa Ward, who's a junior at Southern Utah University. Melissa talked about some of the shortages that Eamon mentioned from the novel, but she compares those also with real-world shortages that have come up in the last few years. She mentioned specifically ones in oil and ones in building supplies like wood and metal. And she talks some about how those are the result of political decisions as well as the COVID pandemic. And then she explains that in the novel, many people, of course, are calling to solve these problems through government welfare programs, handouts to various people or companies. And she says points out that's something that's also going on in real life. That's what a lot of people think is a solution to the problems caused by these shortages. And then here's what she writes about the deeper meaning of that. Melissa says, these sacrifices that are done supposedly in the name of the greater good are, in fact, not solving anything. They become a justification for individuals to feed off the effort of others by proclaiming that those who have more than themselves are unfairly advantaged. And then a little later, she adds, this leads me to what I believe is the bigger issue in both Rand's society and our own. The real crisis is not necessarily a shortage of materials, but a shortage of people willing to create, to fight against the twisted ideals of society and better the world around them. And, I think this passage makes an insightful point that what's at issue both in the novel and in real life is not just the sort of the proximate causes of any particular shortage or any particular economic disruption, but really these very deep foundational issues about the moral ideals that a society upholds. And she's, recognizing this and making the case that what you really need to solve the problems of a society like the one in the book, or some of the problems that we have in our world today, is to uphold better ideals and fight for better ideals. What we need is people who are willing to advocate better ideas. And so I thought that was an eloquent statement of that issue.
And we're going to spend some time in the remainder of our session today talking about what some of those ideas are, or at least the ideas that need to be rejected in favor of better ideas. And that relates to other prompts that we asked about in last year's contest. So, but before we do that, let's not wait any longer than we need to. I think it's already a good time to unveil our first batch of winners, the third place winners. Sam, do you want to? Well, first, let's get a drum roll. Excellent drum roll. And I want to emphasize these are not just people who wrote on the topic we just discussed. These are people who've written on all three of our topics. But Sam?
Yeah. Yes, here are third place winners on all topics. So Lindsay Funk of McMaster University, Annemiek Gritter of Brock University, Claire Huchthausen of the University of Virginia, Vivian Turnbull, apologies, Vivian, of Hillsdale College, and Blake Walker of the University of South Carolina. Congratulations to all five of you. Very excellent work.
Each of you will be getting $500. And if I should mention, if third place $500 isn't enough for you, not all of you are seniors. And in fact, this is also something that college students can write. So if you've entered once and you want to do better the next year, you can enter again, write a new topic. And so we'll have more information at the end about how you can enter next year's topics. There's a whole new batch of essay questions you can already get started on. Having already read the novel, you'll be in an even better position than those who haven't. But let's go to the second prompt, Sam. What is our second prompt?
Yeah, so our second prompt is about the issue of motive power. And here's what it says. Throughout Atlas Shrugged, there are both literal and figurative references to motors and motive power. Describe 3 examples of this that occur in the novel and explain their meaning in the context of the scenes they are taken from. How does this meaning relate to the wider philosophical themes of the novel?
I love this question because it's one that really gives you the opportunity to think about how the plot and the theme connect, because the issue of motors and motive power obviously plays a direct role in the plot. It's a plot about among other things, a woman who runs a railroad, and at the same time, motors are a metaphor for something importantly philosophical in Ayn Rand's ideas. And so we got one essay on this topic which had such a great opening and great structuring to it that I decided to structure our whole presentation of this prompt around the student's structure. And so let me start by sharing with you the opening paragraph, or at least it's from, I think, close to the opening of his essay, to give you an indication of what that structure is going to be. So this is from Francis Elkaran, who is a senior at Istanbul Culture University in Istanbul, Turkey. And here is the opening paragraph that's going to guide the rest of our discussion, and we're going to slot a number of different students' excerpts under this structure. Francis writes, the central instance of that motif was present in Rand's thinking from the outset in her earliest notes on the novel. She wrote that illustrating her theme would require painting, quote, a picture of the world with its motor cut off. She added, show what, how, and why. I take it that if Francis might have read the entirety of her published notes, which are published in Journals of Ayn Rand, but this is also excerpted in, I think, the opening preface to the paperback edition, and so he might have seen that there too, and anybody with that edition could have seen it. But so what he does in his paper is to do exactly that, to show what is this motor that is being cut off, how is it cut off in the story, and why is it cut off. He structures it exactly along the lines of what Ayn Rand herself said she was going to show in her story. And so what we should do now is, using the way that he himself filled that out in his paper, look to see how other students entered with similar ideas in their essays, even though they didn't necessarily structure it the same way as Francis did. So let's start with the what. The what motor gets stopped. What motive power is involved in this story. So Sam, we have you have an excerpt you want to show us from that.
Yeah, so this excerpt came from Heather Jost, a graduate student at the University of Oxford. And Heather writes, soon after, Dagny and Hank Rearden comment on the closing motor companies in a way that highlights what is happening to their world when they say, of what use is a railroad without motive power? Of what use is anything, for that matter, without it? They themselves make this all-important connection between the literal stagnation the new laws have brought to their industries to the stagnation of life itself when thought is condemned. So this is a passage where what I really like about this is that there's a connection that Heather's finding that's present in the novel, and she's really drawing it out in this paragraph, between the literal issue of motive power, of railroads that need locomotives with power to pull their trains, between that and the more abstract and figurative sense of motive power as the thing that makes life go and makes life possible. And so she's talking about the stagnation of railroads, but also the stagnation of life under certain kinds of laws. So I like that connection that Heather's drawing out here.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that she found of what use is a railroad without motive power, of what use is anything for that matter. She's spoken by a second character. I was really hoping somebody would use that passage in an essay on this topic, and someone did. Let's also share another excerpt, also speaking to the question of what motors are stopped in this story. And this comes from Dominique Lazaro, who is a senior at Cornell in Ithaca. And Dominique writes, then we encounter a physical motor, the abandoned designs found in the rubble of the factory. Literally, this motor is what Dagny needs to run the trains efficiently, to physically provide people with goods, resources, and transport. Metaphorically, this motor still represents achievement, energy, purpose, desire, and drive. But it is more than that now. It represents hope and innovation, but also wasted potential. However, the depressing implications of the designs loom over their discovery. When Dagny says nobody will rebuild his motor, there's not enough of it left, she's referring not only to the motor designs, but to motive power and to hope. There is not enough motive power left. There's not enough hope left, and there are not enough men of the mind left. Really excellent passage, and I think she's also hitting the nail on the head as to the Galt's motor's metaphorical significance in this story. One thing that I think a lot of people don't notice when they read this book for the first time is that this is right after they've finished building the John Galt line. They're starting to encounter difficulties with the authorities running it. Dagny finds this motor after a vacation with Hank, and once she finds it, it's both an inspiration because it looks like it's this amazing technological achievement, but yes, then there's the fact that it's not working, and she doesn't know who made it or who could ever make it work again. And on the one hand, she thinks, I could find this person and we could use these motors to power our engines on the railroad. But at various points throughout the plot, she starts to face a choice between trying to save her railroad and trying to find the inventor of the motor. And there's a particularly pivotal moment where she literally faces the choice, and is she going to stay with the train or go in search of the man who invented the motor? And well, I'll leave it to you to find out what she does if you've not yet read the book. Even though I said we would have spoilers, I don't want to spoil that. So really good passage from Dominique. But let's talk about now. We've talked about the what motors are stalling, what motive power is going out of the world. Now about how is this happening? What's causing it?
Yeah, so let's actually go back to Francis's essay to take up this question of how. So Francis writes,
gave us the structure.
Yes. So Francis writes, how does this figurative motor function? By what basic act does Reardon or Wyatt translate his cognitive ability into physical values? And then after writing this, he goes into a description of a really interesting scene in the novel when Dagny and Reardon are riding on the train on the first run of the John Galt line. And Dagny goes and looks at the motors within the train engine and sees all of the intricacy that goes into making those motors work. And she thinks about how each of those pieces was put in place and connected in order to achieve a purpose, and done so by a human mind that was thinking of that purpose and pieced this motor together deliberately in order to accomplish that purpose. And by the way, Francis was not the only person who brought up that scene when talking about the motors. Claire Huchthausen, who was a sophomore at the University of Virginia, also discussed that scene and the way that it shows how the motors really seem to embody human purpose. But Francis, after describing that scene from the novel, continues, the motor of the world, in short, is the men who choose to exert the effort to focus, to reason, to hone their skills ceaselessly, and exercise their peerless ability to the fullest. So what I like about that passage and what Francis is drawing out of that is that there's this connection that he's recognizing between the thought, the intellectual achievement, and the reasoning of the inventors and the actual material achievements that they invent, the actual motor. So there's this, they're thinking and they're planning and they've come up with some purpose, and then they embody it in this device that actually accomplishes that purpose. And that scene with Dagny on the locomotive really brings that connection out very clearly. So it's a great scene to focus on for this kind of discussion.
And so that's a discussion of how it is that the motors are staying powered as long as they are. But of course, I said we were going to also talk about, well, why is it or how is it that these motors are stopping? Because they are. And that is a question that is answered by the next excerpt from Annemiek Gritter. Annemiek's a senior at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario. And she writes, business empires collapse, innovators disappear, raw materials become scarce, deficits become the norm, and it becomes increasingly difficult to find good workers. All these are symptoms of the motor being stopped. And how did Galt stop the motor of the world? As he puts it, he simply did nothing. Of course, he did not actually do nothing, but instead he recognized that his motive power was being abused, and by opting out and waking others up to this reality, he deprived the looter's system of the ability to continue. Since it relied on exploiting brilliance and aspiration in the human soul, he deprived the world of man's mind, and in doing so, stopped the motor. That's a really excellent summary of the answer to the question how that we were just talking about. If it's the human intelligence and ingenuity that makes these motors work in the first place, that was the first excerpt we shared, well, then if you remove human ability and ingenuity and intelligence from the equation, if, as in the case of this story, you convince the men of the mind to go on strike, then what you would expect to happen is the motors of the world would start to stop, including Galt's own motor, which is the very first one to do so when he quits his job many years ago. So we've talked about the what, we've talked about the how. Now, following Francis's reference to Ayn Rand's notes, we should talk about the why.
Yes, let's do that. And we'll begin again, as we did with the how, in talking about why people's motors, their motive power actually does work, why people create and think. And then we'll talk about why the motive power is being destroyed, removed from the world in the novel. So we'll begin with Lindsay Funk, a senior at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. Lindsay writes, in a literal sense, motive power is the energy used to propel machinery, like the motors of a railroad system. However, by defining the two words separately, the latent metaphorical nature is revealed. A motive is best described as a desire to act, while power can accurately be described as the ability to act. Therefore, motive power can be understood as the desire to act in conjunction with the ability to act. And I think this description by Lindsay describes really succinctly something that we've seen in the previous examples that we've talked about. The motors of, for example, the locomotive that Dagny is on, required a mind that was both capable of constructing them and was motivated to construct them, had a reason to, had a purpose, and had a passion to do so. And so I think it's really great that Lindsay kind of took the phrase and looked into the meaning of those words and came up with something that really captures these elements that are united in the work of the inventors.
Yeah, one reason I really liked this passage was because it's really making a good, independent, fact-based observation on her part. She's not. She didn't dig into Ayn Rand's nonfiction philosophy to find out like what is her view of what a motive is. She came up with a definition on her own and thought about its significance in relation to this metaphor of motive power. And indeed, this does speak to the question of why. We talked about how, what, now we're talking about why. Why are they going on strike? Well, because they realize that there should be a reason for why they are allowing their minds to produce empower these motors in the world. There's something that they're trying to achieve, and if for some reason what they're trying to achieve is being frustrated, they owe it to themselves to think, well, why am I helping out? Why am I doing this? Should I instead do something else? Should I instead perhaps go on strike if my efforts are not achieving the purposes that I had intended? And this is something that our next excerpt speaks to, and this is one more excerpt from Francis, who's given us this structure. And Francis talks about why Galt goes on strike. He relates the issue of the motive power of the motor to a point that comes up in a conversation between one of the characters, Francisco d'Anconia, and Hank Rearden, where when talking about the question of why, and it's Francisco's favorite question to ask, what for? Francisco tells us that the issue of the motive, he says it's only a matter of knowing man's motive power. Man's motive power is his moral code. That's a line that Francis quotes. And that was a really crucial find for unlocking the mystery of this metaphor. Because I think you could spend the whole essay, and many people did, talking about the connection between the motor and the mind and the human mind, and that would only give you really about half of what the full meaning here is. To get the full meaning from this author, you need to talk about the issue of motive power and what the author thinks our motive power is, our motive power. So human minds are the motive power of the motors of the world, of the technology of the world, but what powers these human minds? What motivates them? And it's great that Francis found this line from Francisco, because I think that is the main answer we were hoping someone would find. Now, I'll read from a passage where he elaborates on what's going on here. He says, if a man holds as his standard his own life as a rational being, he can achieve his values long range, and happiness will be his reward. But the reverse is true also. The man who attempts to live by the needs of others as his standard will have set his motor against himself. He will be led from loss to greater loss, all the while wondering why doing what's, quote, right brings him no joy. In other words, man at his highest potential is the motor of the world, but morality is the motor of man. That's the idea I was referring to before. It will push him toward accomplishment or destruction, depending on what standard he accepts and whether his chosen values serve his life or injure it. That's a really excellent response from Francis. I should mention Vivian from Hillsdale also brought up this point, the kind of contrast between the two different codes that Francis is mentioning here. And I think we have one more excerpt from the why segment that Sam will share.
Yeah, so going back to Lindsay Funk's essay, she brings up the conflict between two moral codes as it occurs within a single person, Hank Rearden. So she's writing about the need to select the right moral code. And she says, this principle was responsible for much of Rearden's inner turmoil, for he had accepted the looter's moral code that pleasure and wealth was depraved and shameful, while following a conflicting moral code that valued the virtuous use of his mind. Galt asserts that your values fuel the motor of your mind, and that, quote, if you choose a mix of contradictions, it will clog your motor, corrode your transmission, and wreck you on your first attempt to move with a machine which you, the driver, have corrupted, close quote. So I think Rearden is a really interesting example to work with when looking at this novel, because he is somebody who is struggling with having accepted some ideas from a destructive moral code, while on the whole following the kind of life-sustaining moral code that Francis was talking about in the previous excerpt. And it really makes a difference. If you follow his story in the novel, we can see how the ideas that he's holding from this moral code that vilifies pleasure, vilifies wealth, how it affects him, how it really causes him a great deal of personal distress and damage to his life. And then how, as he starts to reconsider those ideas, things start to move in a better direction for him. So this is a really good place in that you can see the kind of the battle between these two moral codes within a single person.
Another thing I really like about Lindsay's excerpt here is that she's also, again, she's found a perfect quotation from the novel that illustrates the issue in question here, which is the precise connection between the motive power metaphor and the actual philosophic thematic issue here. In what sense is morality man's motive power? Well, she found that was just a kind of hint that Francisco gave in conversation earlier in the novel, and here she's found the full meaning of it in Galt's speech, where she's thinking about, well, motive power means motivation, which means emotions. It means the emotions that motivate us to act, and she's found the passage in his speech where Galt is talking about the nature of emotions and how emotional responses are dictated by the value judgments that we make about our position in the world. And whether we feel joy or sorrow at a given instance will depend upon what value judgments we've set for ourselves. And if we decide that sacrifice is good, then we will feel guilty if, for example, we are achieving and not giving anything up, and that's what's happening to Reardon. He's feeling guilt because he's in some way accepted that moral code. When he changes his fuel, when he changes his moral code to see the importance of achievement, the importance of the pursuit of self-interest and happiness, he no longer feels this guilt, and this is part of the reason why he's then able to motivate himself to quit. So really excellent analysis there by Lindsay. And I should also mention that this point, the fact that different moral codes motivate people to do different things because of the different kinds of emotions that they engender in people, there's still a question of, well, why do they pick the codes they picked? Why, for example, would they pick a code that celebrated sacrifice and suffering? That is a question that we will answer when we talk about our third prompt, which is coming up shortly. But before we do that, we have to do something really important, which is to announce our second place winners. And before we put those second place winners up on the screen, I should say that because, of course, once you know who the second place winners are, you can probably deduce who the first place winner is if you've been keeping track. I should mention, from what I understand, it was very close. Who was going to be first place and who was going to be the highest of the second place essays. It was a very close call. So each of these people who won second place should feel pretty good about it. But here they are. Let's get another drum roll. Our second place winners this year are Francis Elkaran from Istanbul Cultural University, Heather Yost from University of Oxford, and Dominic Lazaro from Cornell University. You've now seen excerpts from all three of these, and so hopefully that gives you a good idea of why these were our second place winners this year, because these were some really excellent excerpts that we looked at, and those were indicative, I think, of the general quality of the essays. So congratulations, all of you. You've won $2,500. Sam, should we move then to our final prompt?
Yes, let's turn to our final prompt, which, as Ben mentioned before, gets into the doctrines behind what John Galt calls the morality of death. So that prompt asks, among the many advocates of the morality of death he targets in his radio speech, John Galt reserves special criticism for the mystics who declare that man's duty is to crawl through years of penance, atoning for the guilt of his existence to any stray collector of unintelligible debts, end quote. Name and describe at least two of the doctrines about human nature that Galt says these mystics use to encourage this moral outlook. Then, illustrate their impact by choosing a character from Atlas Shrugged who struggles with these doctrines. If one character struggles with both doctrines, you need only discuss one character. What types of behavior do the doctrines encourage? What are the consequences for the characters in question? How is this struggle resolved?
So this was, I think, probably the hardest of the three questions. Each of them was challenging in their own way, but this one was particularly difficult because it demanded the most of the author with regard to philosophic depth. This is the question that really cuts to the philosophical core of the novel. There are many people who think that Atlas Shrugged is just a story about the producers versus the looters, that it's a kind of political propaganda tract in favor of a certain political viewpoint. And it's not that it's without any political implications, but I don't think the author intended it as political propaganda. She intended it as the way she puts it in her description of the theme. The theme is the role of man's mind in existence, and as a corollary, the demonstration of a new moral philosophy. And so ultimately, this is a novel that's not about politics, but about moral philosophy and about its philosophical foundations. And this question is one that gives the students a chance to think about what those philosophic foundations are by, in this case, looking at the philosophic doctrines that underpin one of these two moralities that Francisco talks about. Francisco, in that same conversation where he says the key is to uncovering man's motive power, talks about how there are two moral codes. And Francisco and Reardon, his friend, has to choose between them. He has a choice between a morality of life and a morality of death. He thinks that Reardon, through most of his life, has been living in accord with the morality of life. At least that's the unarticulated code that he lives by. It's not one he lives by it explicitly. It's the code that allows his mind to keep those motors of the world running. And yet at the same time, there's this other code out there, the one that's demanding things of him, that he sacrifice his ability and sacrifice his achievements. And it's a code that has some effect on that has effect on Reardon because of the way that it makes him feel guilty for his achievements. And so this question gave students an opportunity to grapple with some of the kinds of philosophic doctrines that lead people to be seduced by this kind of code of morality. So let's take a look first at an excerpt from one of the students who answered this question. And I'll mention all of the excerpts we're going to show from this prompt are longer than the ones we looked at before. And that's because what's really good about these passages is the way they really dig into one of these issues, one of these examples. They find a particular character and they show how one of these doctrines, we'll see what they are in a moment, have all kind of cascading consequences for the character's life. So let's take first a look at what Blake Walker, who is a senior at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, said in response to this prompt. Blake is talking here about one of the negative characters of the story, James Taggart. Blake writes, James Taggart's struggle with the doctrine of original sin is best demonstrated in his initial interaction with Cheryl Brooks. When Cheryl inquired about James's negative feelings toward his sister, he answered, because she thinks she's so good. What right has anybody to think he's good? Nobody's any good. What's a human being? A weak, ugly, sinful creature, born that way, rotten to his bones. Blake goes on, in this quote, James identifies the fundamental premise behind the concept of original sin. I think he's exactly right about that, by the way. This premise is the belief that man is immoral by nature. By setting man in the position of the moral debtor at birth, the concept of original sin allows the agents of the mystic ideas to assert that something is owed to them in commensuration of this debt. This is a really great observation on Blake's part. There are people who don't notice that one of the things that Ayn Rand is doing in Atlas Shrugged is explicitly targeting and criticizing and showing the consequences of this traditional religious idea of original sin. And I think Blake has his finger on it exactly when he points to James's acceptance of it. And another thing that Blake does, because I'm going to show a second excerpt here from Blake, is he goes on to show what consequences follow from this for James. And so I'll quote another passage from Blake. James goes on to describe the kind of existence a man would consequently be subject to under this premise of innate immorality, saying, humility is the one virtue he ought to practice. He ought to spend his time, his life on his knees, begging to be forgiven for his dirty existence. When a man thinks he's good, that's when he's rotten. Pride is the worst of all sins. Now he's quoting James Taggart directly here, and I think he's quite right that this is exactly the moral doctrine that one would accept if one believed in original sin. Historically speaking, this is actually true. Like St. Augustine, who is one of the traditional founders of the Christian doctrine of original sin, practically wrote the whole book, The City of God, about why humility is great and why pride is such a sin. So James Taggart here is basically embodying the ideas of St. Augustine. I should mention Blake then goes on in the rest of his essay to talk about the psychological consequences that this outlook has in James's life by talking about, for example, his sex life. And that relates to the next topic that we're going to be talking about, the next example of another doctrine that leads people to be seduced by this morality of death. And this is another excerpt that we have to show from a different essay. So, Sam?
Yeah, so for this excerpt, we'll be looking at Jacob Fisher's essay. Jacob is a graduate student at Stanford University. Again, this is going to be a longer passage, but I think it's really valuable to look at this longer piece because Jacob has a lot to say about identifying how a certain idea has worked its way into a character's life and has expressed in a lot of his actions. So here's the beginning of that. Jacob says, the first doctrine of death Reardon struggles with is that his body and mind are enemies. Reardon lives for years with the values of his mind cut off from the desires of his body, rather than integrating them as one whole. Hank's marriage to Lillian is a dead thing long before it officially reaches a crisis, but he struggles to understand why. She does not embody any of his values. In fact, she is an enemy to them. Her true wishes are to punish him for his virtues and drag him down to her level of vice. That he feels no desire for her follows naturally, yet he allows himself to suffer from guilt for it. He condemns himself for not loving something that he cannot love. And I'll actually continue to the next part of the quote as well, and then comment on it. So Jacob continues, while condemning his lack of desire for Lillian, Reardon also drinks deeply the guilt of physically desiring Dagny. He lets himself believe the premise of his enemies, that the body and its desires are wicked, that his physical appetites are cut off from his spiritual values. Many people suffer from this syndrome in the real world. The results for real people parallel the results for Reardon, including dysfunctional relationships and contempt for sexuality. Such contempt leads to either ascetic negation of sexuality or mindless indulgence of it. So the idea, the premise that Jacob is talking about in Reardon's mind that really wrecks his romantic life for a long time is the idea of the mind-body dichotomy, the idea that we have the mind and the body and that they're opposed to one another, and that we should sort of condemn the body, condemn the flesh, and suppress our bodily desires. And so Jacob is showing us how this manifests in the two romantic relationships that Reardon has in the story. His marriage to Lillian, where he's struggling to understand what's really going wrong in that relationship, even though there are things that seem to kind of stare right in our face, that she's has totally different values. She's completely opposed to his values. That should be a warning sign. And then also his relationship with Dagny, which he feels very guilty for this sexual desire that he has for her, because he has this view that physical desire is wicked, is evil, and that it also that it has nothing to do with your values, your spiritual your spiritual side, your spiritual nature. So it really leads to him to have this all sorts of confusion about his feelings towards these two different women, and to condemn himself for how he feels about both of them, because this idea has been part of what it has led him to think that he should feel differently than he does, and that there's something wrong with him, that he desires Dagny and does not care for Lillian.
And notice there's a really important connection here back to one of our earlier topics, the topic of motive power and the way in which morality is the motive power. Because if you remember that idea that Ayn Rand presents when she has Galt talk about how emotions are programmed by your value judgments, one of the things that's causing Reardon to find this mind-body dichotomy plausible is that really he's just not quite in touch enough with what his actual values are. He thinks that he values the kinds of things that Lillian embodies, but he doesn't actually desire Lillian, and he's perplexed by this. So he thinks there must just be something wrong with his body that doesn't connect to his values. He doesn't realize quite how much he values the things that Dagny does actually embody, and that's why he's confused about why he desires them so much. He thinks that her love for achievement and his own love for achievement are moral black marks. He at one point he says, "We're a couple of blackguards, aren't we?" And after thinking more about it and having conversations with Reardon and observing more about the people around him and the consequences of acting on different ideas, he comes to realize, wait, no, these ideas that Lillian embodies are actually not that great, and the ones that Dagny embodies, the same ones that I embody, actually are great. And so when I desire Dagny, it's not that my body is detached from my mind. Actually, they're quite connected. And so it makes sense that I'm motivated to do the things that I want to do with Dagny, and that I'm not motivated to be with Lillian, and that's when he decides to leave Lillian. So that's a big plot spoiler, but that is a connection between these topics that I think is worth mentioning. Let's share one more excerpt from also from Jacob, and this is where he's talking about one other doctrine, because we asked for two. Another doctrine that empowers this morality of death that causes people to be seduced by it. And here's what Jacob says about his second example, also with the example of Reardon. He writes, Reardon's second struggle is with an inversion of morality. They teach that the degree of your virtue is used as the measure of your penalty. The degree of your faults is used as the measure of your gain. The lie is that man must pay for his virtues, but be rewarded for his faults. The morality of death thus reverses good and evil. Reardon is leeched by a brother who would claim a right to a job by virtue of his incompetence. He is disdained by a wife who would make him guilty because of his integrity. He is oppressed by a government that would rob him because of his ability, and undermined by competitors that would destroy him because he alone can create. So I think that's a good way of really bringing out the meaning of this morality of death, and it does it in a way that connects it to some of those metaphysical issues that we were talking about earlier. And I think we have one more bit from Jacob as well, and this is from the end of his essay that wraps all this up for us. And Sam, you're going to read that one for us.
Yeah. So Jacob writes, these two struggles that Reardon deals with are connected or interconnected. Both are battles against lies about what it is to be human. Both center on how a man will respond to what is best and most beautiful about his nature. The purveyors of the morality of death want a man to hate his body and be ashamed of his strength. This inevitably leads to pain, and that is exactly their moral goal. Unhappiness is the hallmark of virtue. If a man is unhappy, really, truly unhappy, it means that he is a superior sort of person. Close quote. To the contrary, the lovers of life know what a human is and are willing to honor his highest virtues. By turning away from the morality of his enemies and living by his own values instead, Hank Reardon emerges from pain into an unfettered celebration of his own life and will. I really like this as a closing to the essay. I think it's a really eloquent statement of what Reardon overcomes and what he's able to, the moral revolution within himself that he's able to undergo. I really like that description from Jacob's last sentence, unfettered celebration. That's what Reardon emerges into, and I like that because the unfettered, it brings out the way that those moral ideas were like chains that were holding Reardon back, and holding him back in large part from celebrating what makes life great and what makes him great. So that's a really, really nice statement to close out that essay.
Well, no use waiting any further. If you've been keeping track, you might already be able to guess who our first place winner is, and let's find out. So one last drum roll, please. Jacob Fisher is our first place winner, $10,000 prize. I promise the fact that we saved his excerpts for the end there is a coincidence. It happens to be that we were talking about prompt 3 after prompt 1 and 2, and Jacob just so happens to have written on prompt 3, which I do think it was one of the hardest ones to write, and he did it really well, and that is why he is our first place winner. And I think, and I should mention, Jacob is a graduate student at Stanford in Palo Alto. I believe we have Jacob with us. Is that correct? There he is. Jacob, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So tell us about what led you to, first of all, write for this contest. Had you read Atlas before? And then why did you pick this topic?
I had read Atlas one time several years earlier. In reading it again and participating in the contest, and so I did. And I think during the period of time in between the first time I read it some time ago and this more, I suppose just the events of my life helped me develop philosophically. I was ready for a very different experience reading the book than previously, and the case struck me in a completely different way, and it was a very engaging experience, and I encountered ideas that I had never thought of before. Even the book, it was like reading a whole new book this time. And there's nothing I love more than to encounter a new idea or thought of before and wrestle with it and engage with it and decide, do I not agree with this? What are my reasons? And how would it affect my life if I let this change the way? And the essay I wrote is kind of the result of that internal wrestle I had with this and everything that I learned from it. And I found myself in many ways relating to Hank, the writing of this essay, as I thought about the need to know what my own values are and live by them, and not let the world try to force me to have guilt about the things about myself.
I'm glad to hear all that. So this was the second time you read the novel when you did it for the essay. How did you find out about it the first time around?
A friend in high school was a huge fan of Ayn Rand's novels and told me to read. I did.
And you're at Stanford. What are you studying there?
I'm studying law and finance.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure $10,000 will make only a very small contribution to what you must be paying for that, but we sure hope it goes as far as it can. Sam, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
Yeah, Jacob, I'd be
From
curious
one
if you
contest
have...
winner to another.
Yeah. Jacob, I'd be curious if you have a favorite part of the novel, or a scene or a chapter that's particularly meaningful to you that you'd like to share with us.
I think my favorite part, anybody who hasn't read it, forgive me for the spoilers, but it's when Dagny makes it to the town that they've made, where it's all the people of the mind and the movers and the people with initiative and will have made their ideal community. And I just loved reading philosophical ideal of what society like if people lived right, if people took her ideas and a really strong moral foundation together that way, and the way people were productive and the respect they had for each other. And just of that to the chaos happening in the world outside of their little enclave in Colorado. That's what I enjoyed most in the book.
And one last question for me, Jacob. You said you were studying law. What are your future plans? Is there a particular kind of law you'd like to practice? Which field of that subject would you like to work in?
My main interests are international law and also corporate law. And my hopes in the future of practicing law, my main interests are corporate governance, and I hope someday to end up in academia and be a teach and do research.
Excellent. Well, I hope this prize money helps speed you on that way a little bit faster.
It will be very, very helpful.
And it's great to meet you. I hope we hear more from you and from all of our finalists in the future. So thank you very much for joining us, Jacob, and agreeing to come on screen. Our donors in particular, I think, are always very happy to see the faces of the people that their money is reaching, and the impact that it has by encouraging students like you to read and think deeply about these novels.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled and honored here. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thanks, Jacob.
So let's move on to, I think we still do want to share the names of the other finalists and the semifinalists. And we can't read all of these, but we can at least put them on screen, and we'll be, of course, posting the full list of winners onto our website. Someone in Zoom asked about this. Yes, a list of essay winners will be sent out and posted. Here's the list of the finalists, each of whom gets $100. And so some of you may see your name on there. If you're there, congratulations. No small thing to become a finalist. And I think do we have the list of semifinalists as well? Yes, we do. And I don't know if this is the only screen with semifinalists. Maybe we have a couple of screens. No, just one. Okay. Oh, there are two. Good. So I hope many of you see your name on there. And so all of that being said, I do want to say to everybody who entered the contest, whether you won one of the top prizes, whether you're a finalist, semifinalist, perhaps you didn't even place, but you're interested in finding out what it takes to place. The presentation that we gave today was intended to give you some ideas about that, but something else that you can do to learn more about this book and about the ideas behind it is to participate in one of those reading groups that Sam mentioned earlier. And I just want to give people information again about how to join those reading groups, because this is a really logical next step if you're looking to learn more about the nonfiction ideas behind the fiction, because Ayn Rand has a number of different nonfiction books. These reading groups happen several times a year. The most recent iteration of it started just a few weeks ago, and so there's still a lot of time left in the current iteration. You could sign up now and join this week if you wanted to. Sam participates in one of these groups, actually maybe more than one, and they meet every week, and each of them is discussing one of the 4 nonfiction works that you see by Ayn Rand on the screen today. And if you're interested in joining up with one of these, you can go to university.aynrand.org/RG. These groups involve these weekly discussions involving like-minded young people, all of whom are exploring these nonfiction essays of Ayn Rand for the first time. And I think we have one more announcement that Sam is going to share with us.
Yes, we'd like to remind you that we run this contest on an annual basis, and next year's contest is already open for entries. There's already up on our website where you can submit to the 2023 contest. We have 3 new questions for next year about money, the sanction of evil, and morality and practicality. So if you were, not quite the top winner or one of the finalists, semifinalists, or just a participant, so long as you still meet the eligibility criteria, we hope to see you participate again. Or of course, if you haven't participated before, we'd love to see your entry in the current contest. Also, of course, as we've mentioned already, there will be the full list of winners on all levels, first, second, third place, finalists, semifinalists will be posted on our website, along with the full text of Jacob's winning essay. That will all be available at aynrand.org/contest. That will have all the information about this year's winner's winning essay and the next upcoming contest. And you can also always email us at essays@aynrand.org if you have any questions pertaining to the essay contest. And I should also mention the deadline for the next contest is November 6th. So there's plenty of time if you want to work on an essay submission for the next iteration of this contest.
Yeah, so we'll wrap things up now, but I'll just close by saying, first of all, that I mean, there's a reason why this is at least one of my favorite presentations to do every year, because so much of what we do at the Ayn Rand Institute involves looking at the world, analyzing it philosophically, finding, unfortunately, many kinds of problems with it. But when we get a chance to do the essay contest, we get a chance to celebrate some real achievements and to celebrate the work of some very bright, very motivated young people who have discovered these amazing novels and who've taken the time and committed to writing an essay about them and to reflecting on it intellectually. And it's really worth celebrating. It's really something to be proud of if you're one of the essay writers. So thank you so much for taking time with us to put that time into writing this. If you're somebody who's watching and who didn't place today, thank you for showing up as well to learn more about these ideas and more about this contest. And we wish you the best of luck in the future, the best of premises, as Ayn Rand herself used to say. And thank you once again to the donors to the Ayn Rand Institute who make all of this possible, who pay for the prize money. You are the motive power of this contest, and we owe a debt of gratitude to you, and thank you once again. And we will see you again when we announce the winners for the next set of essays. I believe we'll be doing those for the Fountainhead and for Anthem sometime, I think, in the fall. So look forward to that. And thank you, Sam, for joining me today to do this.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And I agree with everything you just said.